It is Sunday, the 6th of November, 2016. I'm in front of the Unitarian Church in Montreal, engaged in my alternative spiritual practice of protesting against Unitarian Universalist injustices, abuses, and hypocrisy. And it looks like my camera cut out at some point. I don't know if it's because it went over the half-hour limit and I just didn't notice, or if it cut out for some other reason, but I'm restarting it. But a certain amount of monologue got unrecorded. It's not fine. I should say it's fine. It's not a problem. Good morning, sir. Thank you. What I'm getting at is, I regularly narrate, what's happening in the protests. It's actually very repetitive. It's pretty much the same thing weekend after weekend. So if a certain amount of monologue didn't get recorded, it's not a huge problem, because I'm sure it's been said before or something close to it. But I actually was speaking of some of the earliest aspects of this protest, and what happened is, I don't know if this was recorded or not, but there was a small group of people who had approached the church and had gone in, let's say, I don't know, 15-20 minutes ago, something like that. It was around 10 to 11 when they went in, and they were latecomers, and then they came out within minutes. I'd say within 10 minutes of going in, they were out again. So let's say at around 11 o'clock, they had come out of the Unitarian Church of Montreal, and they were standing as a group on the other side of that patch of dead flowers. So on the path leading out towards the west there, they were standing right there, and a woman with blonde hair looked at my direction, and I heard what sounded like sick. So I thought perhaps she was saying I was sick, as in mentally ill, which is unfortunately a common thing said by Montreal Unitarians and other Unitarian Universalists about yours truly. In fact, this protest began as a result of that. So I asked, I said, are you saying I'm sick? And she said, no. And what it turned out is she was reading the picket sign in my right hand, which says unsafe sect, and I didn't hear the unsafe part. If I'd heard unsafe, I would have understood what she was saying. All I heard was her pronunciation of sect, which sounded like sick. So I asked. I wasn't like aggressive or anything. I just said, is that what you're saying? And I would have discussed that issue if that had been the case. If she had been saying I was mentally ill, I would have tried to engage with her on that. But as it is, I was mistaken. I misheard her saying sect as sick, and that was the end of that. They went on their way. I explained to them that Montreal Unitarians have portrayed me as mentally ill in the past, and I even said that within the last hour, a Montreal Unitarian, or maybe not a Montreal Unitarian, but a Quebec Unitarian, specifically Yves Masseau, had said I was malade, which means sick in French. So that's one of the reasons why I perhaps heard sect as sick, because less than an hour earlier, Yves Masseau had said I was sick in French, and we had begun discussing that. But then I noticed that there was this group, gathered outside the church. I probably should have continued my conversation with Mr. Masseau. Probably should have just ignored the group for a while and dealt with him. But I decided to, document what was happening with the little group that goes in as a procession. So anyway, getting back to Unitarian Universalists saying I'm sick, unwell, deranged, mentally ill, psychotic, various other labels. You know, I've basically been accused of suffering from a variety of fairly serious mental illnesses or disorders. You know, this protest began in part as a protest against being labeled as psychotic by Reverend Ray Drennan very soon after he became minister of the Unitarian Church of Montreal. This is what I was explaining in my monologue that didn't get recorded, and that's why we're repeating it, because I actually haven't spoken about this in some time now. So if we go back to 1995, specifically, if I remember correctly, November 9th of 1995, I believe it was a Thursday, or I like to sometimes say Thorsday, the day after a board meeting of the Unitarian Church of Montreal, where I had submitted a letter of grievance about the anti-democratic manner in which the board of the Unitarian Church of Montreal had banned a interreligious celebration of creation being celebrated in the church. I had a previously scheduled meeting with Reverend Ray Drennan in my apartment to try and explain my revelatory religious experience to him, to explain the interreligious event that I was organizing, and so on. And he came into the meeting very, very angry because I had filed this complaint against the board, in which he was barely mentioned in. In fact, he had been originally mentioned in the letter because he was involved, but on the recommendation of a friend, I removed what I had thought. I thought I had removed all reference to him. I certainly removed all reference to him by name from the letter. So it was basically, my complaint was centered on the board of the church rather than the minister. But I had failed to remove a sentence which referred to the spiritual leadership of the church. So he was, you know, implicated, if not by name. And he was implicated in what happened. But in any case, getting back to things, you know, Reverend Ray Drennan was very, very angry coming into the meeting as a result of this letter of complaint. In fact, he refused to even discuss the issues that he was there to discuss with me, and insisted on, you know, discussing the letter of complaint and claiming it was like threats, which it absolutely wasn't. I mean, it just was a complaint against a very undemocratic thing that the board did, or anti-democratic thing. So anyway, you know, after he was done with his angry tirade at me regarding my letter of complaint, I said, well, you know, you're here to you know, learn a bit about my religious experience. You're here to learn a bit about Creation Day, which was the name of the interreligious event that I was promoting, and proceeded to start speaking initially about the religious experience. I was trying to explain the religious experience to him, and you know, as I was in the middle of trying to explain the religious experience to Reverend Drennan, he angrily interrupted me and he said, "You mean your psychotic experience?" You know, so, you know, here I am talking about a, you know, revelatory religious experience, a spiritual experience, a mystical experience, and in Reverend Ray Drennan's mind, you know, it's a psychotic experience because, you know, from his hardcore atheist perspective, it's simply not possible to have a religious experience. So I'm the kind of guy, I'm like, basically I don't get annoyed all that easily. I have pretty good control over my temper and so on. And so I didn't make a big issue of it. I just continued on and started talking about Creation Day, the interreligious event that I, you know, had successfully organized a year earlier, and which had been celebrated in the sanctuary of the Unitarian Church of Montreal a year earlier, or maybe a bit more than a year earlier, but certainly within 2 years. So I'm explaining this interreligious event, which brought together a good variety of different religious groups, including pagans, which is a bit of an accomplishment because it's difficult to get the monotheistic religions to participate in interreligious events that include pagans, or at least it was in the mid-1990s. So it was, quite good. Had Native American, First Nations, Indigenous, whatever term you want to use, representation as well. Hindu, Baha'i, Christian in terms of Roman Catholic, and also Eastern Orthodox. Unfortunately, no official Jewish representation. At the time, it was difficult to get rabbis to participate in interreligious events. But a good cross section, Muslim representation. So there was pretty representation from most of the major religions and some smaller ones. And I'm describing this interreligious event, and Reverend Ray Drennan angrily interrupts me again. He says, "You mean your cult?" And I say, well, what do you mean by cult? Because obviously, while the word, as a rule, is very pejorative, it's also can be very broadly interpreted as just a belief system kind of thing. But it was pretty clear from how he said it. It was angry, contemptuous, way he said, "You mean your cult?" It was obviously meant in the worst sense of the word. He came back with a manipulative and secretive religious group. That was his exact words in response to my question, what do you mean by cult? A manipulative and secretive religious group. So he meant cult in, the worst sense of the word. Heaven's Gate, Solar Temple, Jim Jones, and all that kind of stuff. And I should note that at the time, the Solar Temple cult was in the news. The suicide murders occurred at around the same time. So it was actually about a year earlier. I remember now because, good day. Thank you.
You are right.
Yeah, I try to be right. Sorry?
You have too many religions.
Well, I'm not against religion. I'm against religion doing bad things. So.
Exactly. Well.
Yeah. So this woman's saying I'm right. There's too many religions, and I'm explaining to her, well, I'm not anti-religious. I'm not against religion. I'm against, religions behaving badly. And yes, I don't think I need to go into how the major monotheistic religions and their followers have behaved badly over the years. But it's unfortunate that in their own way, Unitarian Universalists behave badly. Not on the same scale as the other major religions, but only perhaps because they're these days a tiny declining fringe religion, to borrow a description of Unitarian Universalism that UUA president Reverend Dr. Peter Morales came up with when he was running to be president. Very apt description, really. A tiny declining fringe religion. Sounds almost like a cult. So getting back to the whole cult word, here's Reverend Ray Drennan, the new minister of the Unitarian Church of Montreal. He hadn't even been officially installed as a minister when this meeting took place. His official installation was some weeks later. Here he is, labeling an interreligious event that it organized as a cult. And in the worst sense of that word. I filed a complaint. It took a little bit of time to file the complaint because, I did actually consult a lawyer, not because I wanted to sue the church or anything, but I wanted to protect myself you know, from backlash, you know, from a complaint. So I ideally wanted a lawyer to write a letter of complaint for me, you know, to ensure that Reverend Ray Drennan withdrew his slanderous allegations and apologized for them. And the lawyer I spoke with basically said that he wasn't prepared to do that, or it just wasn't practical. Anyway, he wasn't going to do it. But what he did say is he recommended that I get a psychiatric assessment before filing the complaint, because, you know, Reverend Ray Drennan had also labeled me as psychotic. So he said, you know, before you file a complaint, get a psychiatric assessment, you know. So I did. You know, I had a assessment by a, you know, Montreal psychiatrist, and that was spread over a few months. So it took a few months before I actually filed the complaint, because it took a few months to get the psychiatric assessment before filing a complaint. So the complaint was filed on February 14th of 1996. The attack was November 9th, if I remember correctly, of 1995. So a few months between the attack and the complaint being lodged. And you know, all I was asking for was a formal withdrawal of the offending words and an apology for them. I wasn't asking for any specific disciplinary action. I left that up to the Unitarian Church of Montreal and the Unitarian Universalist Association to decide. The number one thing that I wanted was recognition that Reverend Ray Drennan had gone more than a little bit too far in labeling me as psychotic and in labeling Creation Day as a cult. And if all that had happened was a formal retraction and a formal